I'd like to introduce our first keynote speaker, Nora Twomey. Please, would you come up? She's had a great year.
Hello, good morning. Was I the only one who was woken up by an alarm this morning? No? Yes? Maybe I was. Maybe it was in my head. I thought it was a great idea. Whoever idea it was fantastic, because I jumped out of bed and had 14 cups of coffee, so I'm more than ready to go this morning. I am one of the founders of Cartoon Saloon. I am a director, and I try and balance that with somehow kind of owning a business as well. It's a very strange balance, and one that's only possible because I work with tons of people with all different types of talents, I guess. And that's what my talk is about today, really, is just talking about my own personal journey, but also collaboration, because for me, that was the huge revelation. I always drew. As a kid, I always drew. But understanding the role of collaboration in drawing and creativity and storytelling is something that continues to evolve for me, and something I keep trying to understand. Right now, I'm at a place where I'm really trying to empower the people around me to be as creative as possible and to try and drive all of that in one direction. It's not what I thought it was going to be, but it is wonderful. It's cool. This image that I wanted to start with it kind of encapsulate that for me. It was from the Breadwinner. We were rewriting the story at a certain point, or part of the story. We were tied up in story knots. And I did this really crappy little scribble on my sketchbook. And then Reza Riahi, one of the art directors on the project, took that and he drew it in the style of Persian miniature artwork. And then Alice Dudonné, who's the art director on the film I'm working on at the moment, she worked it up into this incredible image. And I realized, God, there's such a wonderful magic that happens when, somebody has half an idea, half-arsed idea, somebody else draws on top of that, and somebody else draws on top of that. And then it became like a really, big, powerful climactic sequence in the film. There's something about when everybody believes in the one story, everybody believes in the one drawing, no matter how crappy it is, and everybody tries to push that forward, that I find, like I said, it's a magic to me. I don't really understand it, but today's presentation is somewhat an exploration of that. So I've made short films, I've been involved with features, I've been involved with commercials, pretty much everything and anything that I could do over the last 20 years to keep the lights on, and the studio and Cartoon Saloon, and working before that as well. Yeah. So for those all look like nice final images, but all of this the work, I think, really comes from pages like this. From my very early days when I used to draw like on the back of bits of wallpaper, like I would tear them off the wall, 1970s wallpaper, tear it off and draw on the back of it, and then try and stick it back on with a bit of saliva or something. I would just draw, and again, sometimes it's the crappiest drawings that reveal, something that somebody else can use, or that you can use together as a team. So I have, books and books of these. I go through many. Usually the first page is like a really studied, drawing, and then by the end of it, I kind of, you got frame counts and torn pages and phone numbers and all this kind of stuff. But that's as it should be. I'm not a fan of perfect sketchbooks. I think that they're fake, fake news, fake sketchbooks. So I don't think you should. I think that if you're honest anywhere, it has to be in your sketchbooks, and that honesty then can go on into whatever you're doing, but it has to start there, really, because that's your big method of communication with yourself first and foremost before you start with a team, is with that sketchbook. What are you trying to say? So this is me 7 years ago. So it was interesting, I think, as a kid, and this is like 1970s. where art wasn't seen as a career, people tried to kind of take you away and kind of go, you're going to end up a bum on the street if you do something to do with art. So just like, become something else, like a nun or a nurse or something. So at this age, whatever this was, 6 or something like that, it was acceptable to be creative. You can take pieces of wallpaper off and draw on them and stick them back on the wall. That's grand. But then, and this might be from a bit older, you can see early 1980s fashion there going on with the hair. It's kind of coming back in fashion now, I think. But as I got older, it was less acceptable to do that. I was often sitting in the back of class being very quiet and supposedly thinking of whatever theorems or whatever I was supposed to be doing, but I really wasn't. All of my energy was put into kind of faking, pretending that I hadn't, or that I had done the stuff that I hadn't actually done. I just couldn't concentrate. My brain was too full of stuff. If a tutor stood in front of me, I would start thinking about like what they had for breakfast instead of like what they were saying. And I really just wanted to run away, and I kind of did. At about 15, I left school. I didn't run away. I kind of ran up the fields and kind of hid in hedges and things like that. But I left. I couldn't hack it. I knew it was going to kind of creatively kill me in some way, shape, or form. I had no language around it or anything like that, but I knew I had to quit. So at 16, I got a job making reproduction antique dolls, which looking back on it is fairly freaky, because I used to, work in a workshop that had like rows and rows of heads with no eyes and all this kind of stuff. Not quite as freaky as that now. But fairly freaky. Years later, I went and kind of made a doll, which I now freak my children. If I want them to go to bed, I will just like chase them with this doll. But it was, again, for a kid who like kind of lost confidence, lost, faith in the education system and all that kind of stuff, I was handed a paycheck. It was something like £30 a week or something like that. But it was like, okay, you did this work. Here's some money for the work that you did. And for me, that was incredibly empowering. So my first boss was an incredible woman who had a strange passion for reproduction antique dolls that she tried to instill in me. Animation is only slightly less weird, I think. But so then I realized at about 19 that I wanted to get back into education somehow. So I needed to earn a lot of money. So I worked in a vegetable factory, watching conveyor belts full of vegetables go by. You could earn the most money by doing big, long night shifts. So I used to do like 12-hour night shifts, watching conveyor belts like this. But it was an incredible training for my imagination, because you couldn't talk to people because the machinery was so loud. You had earplugs on, earmuffs on top of the earplugs, and you were supposed to watch the vegetables. So there was nothing to do except just make up stories. So for hours and hours at a time, I would just make up stories. I'd get halfway through the story in my head, and I go, oh, that doesn't work. So I go back to the beginning again, and I try and work things out that way. So honestly, my favorite place, my favorite workplace in the world at the moment is sitting at an edit machine. And I enter that same creative space as I did when I was sitting at conveyor belts. See these plastic gloves? After about 10 minutes, the tops would go and your fingers would be poking through. So if you're ever eating vegetables like that, just look out for little plastic bits. So then at 20-something, I don't know, 21, 22 or something like that, I did a foundation course in Cork originally. That's where I'm from, but I lost all my Cork accent because I went to Ballyfermot afterwards. I didn't want to be going, so where's the 7080? Does it go from around here or is it over across the road? So I kind of flattened it all out. So I can do the rest of the presentation like this if you like. Might be a little bit anxious. Inducing. Have you had enough coffee? So I went to Ballyfermot then. So again, what was amazing was it was based on your portfolio, because I had no points, right? So it was the drawings that I did and the potential, and because the drawings at that time weren't much of a step up from the fashion ladies that you saw early on, but it was the potential, and for me that was incredible, because again there was such value being placed on what you were going to do and who you were going to be and how you were going to work and all of this. So that was incredible. And meeting people who were kind of nerdy and all loved, drawing and all that kind of stuff, that was incredible. And the friendships I made there, I still have to this day. One of the tutors on the first day, this is like an approximation of a drawing that I remember doing in the first couple of weeks of college, and the tutor asked us to draw a character. So I drew something like this, because I love chickens and hens, and I'm not exactly sure, I can't remember, it was supposed to be like a turkey or a hen or something anyway, but the point is I drew it completely off balance, but didn't realize that I drew it off balance. So the tutor came up and said, well, your character is going to fall over. And I thought I was being really smart, and I said, well, no, it's not, because it's just a drawing, it's not going to fall over. And my tutor said, no, it's not. I asked you to draw a character. You drew this. I believe you when you say that this is a living, breathing character. And you've drawn it off balance. Have you done that deliberately? And of course, I sheepishly said, no. And my tutor said, look, you're making a pact with whoever's looking at the work that you're doing. You're making a pact. This is a character. Believe me, I'm communicating something with you, and be in full control, as much as you can be anyway, of what you're communicating with your audience there. So I learned how to draw characters more balanced after that, kind of. After college, I went to work in Brown Bag for a year. I met Alan Shannon, Mark Cumberton. I met Doc and Cahill, of course. I worked on Alan's short, the Last Elk, among lots of other things that I was working on with them at the time. And for me, that was a huge education. 1 week you'd be working on something that, you were really concentrating on, that would be, maybe 3 seconds of animation a week. And then the next week you could be trying to do a minute of animation on a completely different project. So for me, that was an incredible education. How do you use your time? How do you look at the project that you're working on and try and, balance all of those needs, I guess. This is a lovely short. I just grabbed this off the internet. I wish I had stolen some of my, the cleanup or rough drawings at the time. I could have sold them here this weekend. So then I came down to Kilkenny with Tom and Paul. Tom Moore, of course, is from Kilkenny, and he managed to get us some cheap rent, basically, in an organization called Young Irish Filmmakers, whom he had, spent his teenage years with. So there are my old college buddies, Tom and Paul, still the three of us together, still smiling. So this is us way back then, looking a little bit more naive in one room in a strange old orphanage in Kilkenny. Full of enthusiasm and energy and naivety. I still have that smile, pretending I know what I'm doing, and half the time I don't. I'm always looking for the true line, and again, that's what the sketchbooks are about. It's looking for, you make 100 lines and one of them is true. One of them is real. One of them is trying to communicate something. So for me, that's what my whole career is about. Sometimes it's drawing in a sketchbook. Sometimes it's like, reams and reams of layers in an edit. Sometimes it's, conversations with animators or composers or whatever. It's just all looking for some kind of truth, some universal truth that you can communicate to your audience. The first short I made was called From Darkness. It was supported by the Irish Film Board. And again, that was, everything. It's funny because I'm kind of like a frightened person, right? But I somehow always manage to, I never do the same thing twice. Everything feels like a step up and a step up in terms of the stretch. I'm sure at some point I will become a total recluse and start kind of closing in back in on myself. But it just feels like everything is like a step up and up and up in terms of the amount of challenges, I think, like the things I don't know. I remember watching Lord of the Rings, the first Lord of the Rings film, I think, when I was in the middle of making this and thinking, oh my gosh, what amazing sound design. And then going, sound design? I'm making a short film and I have no idea what sound design is. I don't know any sound designers. I have to deliver this film in about 3 months. So I don't remember half of Lord of the Rings, basically, because I spent the whole time inside in the cinema going, shit. So I made another short then called Colleen Dulach, which is based on based on an Irish story by an Irish writer called Jackie McDonough. And he was kind of exploring a really weird idea about a kid who's born with his head on backwards. But again, we tried to find the universal truth in that, and it was about acceptance and your parental acceptance, basically. So we built a kind of a dynamic between this character, Coolin, and his mum and his dad, and tried to say something. I mean, saying something within your time frame of a short film is really difficult. Do you have time for a beginning, middle, and end? Do you have time just to get across an idea? Are you just making a statement? What are you doing? So how do you make people care? How do you make people care if you only have 9 minutes and you need to make them care in the first 30 seconds? For me, these were all really, really interesting challenges. At the same time, we were making commercials, flashcards, all the crazy stuff. Does anybody remember flashcards? It was back in the time where somebody would send you a message, on your email saying, this card is, ready for you, whatever, kind of thing, happy birthday. And you would click on it because you completely trusted that it was not a virus or something like that. And then it would be like you'd wait for it to load up. Anyway, we used to do that stuff. Secret of Kells then, yeah. So Tom asked me to come on to Secret of Kells as a co-director. I think I was finishing off Coolin at the time. The company was in a crazy expansion. We had gone from 15 people to 75 in the space of about 2 or 3 months. We were making Skunk Fu, a TV series at the same time. Again, massive learning curve. This whole film was made on paper, even though it was a co-production between 3 countries, but we ended up shipping animation to Brazil and Hungary and places. So again, just massive learning curve, trying to understand pipeline. Every problem that we dealt with was one that we hadn't come across before. It was incredible. My huge memory from this, though, is directing voice actors. This is my first time kind of, trying to direct voice actors. And Brendan Gleeson, who I was starstruck by, would just come in and, he'd do first, he'd do a take of a line. And I go, that's grand, so thanks very much. And he'd go, well, do you want, me to do it different ways? No, it's perfect, it's grand, thanks. And now actors run when they see me coming because I try and squeeze every last ounce of anything that could possibly be useful out of them. But again, we're talking about just learning curves. So now I listen to the soundtrack of that and I can hear stuff. So of course it's based on the Book of Kells, a 9th century manuscript. But again, when we were trying to, so this is the idea for Kells came from Tom and his friend Aidan Hart when they were teenagers. It was always going to be a film about the destruction of the monastery in Kells, but for kids, right? So we were trying to struggle with the tone of the film all the time. And again, of course, we brought in co-producers, and with we had all these discussions about tone and how we were going to manage the tone. What we were really interested in, though, was the space between reality and imagination, the space between the old pagan ways and the coming of the Christian ways. And again, not particularly to do with religion or belief, but we were more interested in the power of magic, I guess, and the magical thinking and what that does, and how in times of chaos we all kind of look for some kind of magic, I guess, something to hang on to. It's hope, I guess. So yeah, we were looking at where the book may have been created and the type of work that was in the book, and the relationship between the two. And at the time, I said we knew nothing really about story arc. We knew nothing about crafting a feature-length story experience for an audience. So our French co-producer introduced us to Fabrice, who's an amazing writer, who introduced us to the hero's journey, which it's an interesting coat hanger on which you can hang the coat of a film, I guess. And it's a language that all writers know, and certainly one that was a revelation to us. And it's something that I argue about and struggle with. And honestly, I'm at some point I don't know. I don't know if the hero's journey is an American thing, honestly, and whether it really fits with our kind of European sensibilities. It's very much about a hero going out, starting a task, coming against all kinds of challenges and then accomplishing it or not accomplishing it. Basically, you can decide on which kind of story you're making. But again, it's interesting. It's an interesting way of viewing films. You basically, chop your film up into arcs. You have your first act, which is your call to adventure, your challenges and temptations, and your second act, and your character goes through some kind of revelation. For us, it was a huge revelation, and certainly every film that we make is kind of a revelation. You can see it in all kinds of stories, from Jesus Christ all the way through. We use it in The Secret of Kells, Rocky. You can break up your entire day into kind of a hero's journey if you want. But again, it's an interesting, the story that the film that I'm working on now. I'm having those same discussions, and again, I don't know if I'm any closer to really understanding whether it's just a bunch of rules that we all follow because that's what you do, because it's like a certain model of storytelling that's less than 100 years old or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, there you go. If you have a notebook, just write that down. So yeah, we were interested in the contrasts, right? So everything is contrast in the space between things. So nature and civilization. We looked to work those into the artwork that we were creating at the time. Life and death, and placing our protagonist in the center of it. We were, again, the tone of this whole thing we were really struggling with. It was my first time sitting at a big proper Avid machine and trying to understand A, the technicalities of the whole thing, but B, then just realizing, oh my God, I have the whole film here, and this is what the audience is going to see. And it was in a very scrappy, rough form or whatever, but that's it, that's the film. For me, again, it reminded me of that drawing of the off-balance foul, whatever it was. The feeling that you're making a pact with your audience, and you have to respect that and really give it the respect that it deserves. I remember sitting with audiences of different ages when we completed Kells, and again, just trying to understand what was going on in their heads, what the experience was like for them, because it's no longer your film, right? You make it, you're familiar with every breath in it, every piece, every frame, but it's no longer your film. It's open to the interpretation of every member of your audience. And again, I was really aware that we had small kids in there, and they were looking at, Crom, and the tone of it was something that I was struggling with, and something that I think I've spent my career kind of struggling with. How do you manage tone? How much do you give children, and how much do you let them discover for themselves? But it was interesting that when we got a lot of audience feedback, kids, they latch on to a character, and lots of stuff flies over their head, or they decide not to focus on it. But this little girl said, I especially liked Aisling. She was interesting because she was more of a rough and tumble kind of girl who thought that dolls were boring, a bit like me. And I'm pretty sure that Aisling doesn't say anything about dolls in the film, but the girl had made a big connection with the character. And again, it's not something that we wrote, in there, but it's something that's there. Tommy Younger, who passed away this year, and who had the privilege of meeting, said something like that children need to feel fear in order to know how to conquer it. It's something, again, now that I have my own kids, that I try to understand more and more. How do you prepare children for the world that they're going to inherit from us? How do you do that in a responsible way as a filmmaker? How do we use every aspect of ourselves as filmmakers? It's not just 9 to 5. It's not about merchandise. It's about how do you be the most responsible human being that you possibly can, I guess. At the same time, after Kells, we were making things like Puff and Rock, a TV series for a very young audience. And again, I was wondering about the tone of that and how to kind of balance it. And then my son, I hope he's not here because he's going to charge me for this drawing. So he drew this, and again, I'm learning all the time. The further I go on, the more I realize I don't really know anything. So here's what's going on in his head when he was 7, right? So he's got like a sea monster who's attacking a human sacrifice. You've got a dog who seems to be really into it, and a Roman soldier, and some guy giving instructions to the sea monster, and I'm not sure exactly where the octopi stand on the whole thing, whether they're pro or against. But I couldn't make imagine if I went and pitched a film like this, said, well, it's for 7-year-olds. People would be like, what? So again, tone, Song of the Sea. We knew it was always going to be a film about loss. Tom had this really beautiful, beautiful idea about loss, and it was so delighted that, he stuck to his guns with the whole thing, and made it such a gorgeous film. Of course, it's about selkies again, the idea of mythical creatures, and again being using them for a very real subject, which is loss. As I said earlier, I didn't stay in school very long, so I'm not going to say these lyrics, but these are written by Colmo Snuddig of Keela, and he wrote these lyrics, which kind of encapsulate the Song of the Sea for me anyway, which is about being between places, between north and south, between here and there, because when he was gigging, so he loves, of course, playing music. He had a young son and a wife, and he loved his family, right? So when he was playing music, he missed his wife and his child back home. When he was with his wife and his child, he missed gigging with his buddies. So it was like that place between, that melancholy. So that became the Song of the Sea. So again, even though we were dealing with a kind of an open ending with Song of the Sea, we tried to very much bring in the kind of, in a way, the hero's journey arc to it. Because we were dealing with magic, my role on Song of the Sea was head of story. Magic is always full of plot holes, and it's really hard to manage. But so at one point, when we were, again, sitting at the Abbot trying to understand the story that we had and what we were going to talk to our audience about, I just brought it back down to the family. I felt that if we understood the family dynamic, people will forgive you plot holes. If your relationships with your family, or whatever your main characters feel real, then a plot hole doesn't matter really. That's the greater truth is your characters. You can have a wonderful structure in your film, but if your characters don't feel like they're telling you something that feels like it's raw from the filmmaker, like an actual like scratch with, then it's forgettable, and nobody wants to make a forgettable film. The Breadwinner, I kind of stumbled into it. I wasn't really looking to direct at the time. I was kind of happy, kind of creatively fostering different projects within the studio. I had, 2 young kids and that, so I wasn't really looking to direct something, but I read Deborah Ellis's book and just felt, again, that the right kind of fear, right? The challenge, like that I didn't, if I took on this project, I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, wasn't sure what I was going to try and say, I wasn't sure who I was going to do it with. So those were all it's all the right kind of fear, I think. Maybe I'm just an idiot, I don't know. It took about 5 years, I guess, from that original reading of the book all the way through to final color grade and sound mix and that. Which is a long time, but animation takes a long time. And actually, this is a very short time frame. I think Kells took about 10 years, really. Actually, if you count Tom and Aidan as teenage years, it took a long, long time. It was from the novel by Deborah Ellis, who's an amazing woman. She writes, again, in this. She reminds me of Tom Younger in that she takes children seriously, really, really seriously. And for me, that's incredibly inspiring and something that I wanted to kind of hold true for the film. I wanted to take the flame that she lit in that book, based on her experiences talking to Afghan women and children and trying to, she goes around the world, places like Palestine, and just, trying to really understand conflict, understand what it does to children, and trying to make children from different parts of the world understand each other. So incredibly inspiring woman. But again, I wasn't. This was our first massive adaptation. I wasn't really sure what you keep from the book. I knew there was lots of stuff that I couldn't. I knew that the book was published in 2000. So much had happened in the meantime, and I wanted to respect that because it was a more naive time, I guess, in lots of ways. So we brought in a fantastic screenwriter and live-action filmmaker, Anita Doran, who helped us. I'm going to start watching the time. She wrote a really beautiful screenplay. Again, she's a poet as well, and so she writes very visually for animation. And again, we did, the usual, let's do the hero's journey thing. But it was an interesting one because I knew, because of where I wanted to go with the Breadwinner, there was no resolution really. What's the resolution? And it took us a long, long, long time to kind of figure out the exact tone of the film that we were making, what we were going to leave our audience with. These were the huge, huge questions, and ones I didn't have answers for a long, long time. And it all started with her character. I always try and radiate everything out from your character. You have your main protagonist, and everything else, the world of the film, is what it needs to be in order to challenge that character. And I knew she couldn't be like a typical, this is me, she was a young Afghan girl. She was in ways like older than, than her years. And again, the whole context of this film is so real. I had to be so respectful, I guess, of the subject matter. And again, all the contradictions. Like, we're making a film about kids who work like 16 hours a day, who might be paying off a debt for their parents or whatever, for kids, for other types of kids who don't have any such worries. So we just, for the entirety of making this film, the conversations were open. This, for me, was I know we did it on song to an extent, but it was, this was an internet film, I could Skype with somebody in Afghanistan. I could, who would put questions out to their entire, like, extended family, and then I'd get, like, millions of answers back and all this kind of stuff. So I traveled, a bit for this film, but most of it was done on the internet. Lots of our research was done on the internet. Lots of our research was done by asking people for their memories. What was it like to be in a market? How did people hold themselves? What was your, abiding memory? And we wove all of those into the film as much as we could. But again, scrappy sketchbooks. None of this stuff really ends up in the film, but it's all just questions. You can see sometimes I share actually it's hard to tell, but some of those drawings are not mine, they're my son's upside down ones. And I don't know which came first. But again, just, it's all about scrappy. Trying to work out the exchange rate between Afghani and dollars. And which was a huge conversation, actually. It was one of those conversations that I sent out to one consultant, and then I got like 50 answers back, and God, jeez. So it's funny, actually, because at one point in our script, we had a little bit where Parwana posts a letter. And so I asked, okay, what do post offices look like at the time? And I got this, Amanullah, when the guy said, you wouldn't post a letter at the time because the Taliban would, open the letter, they would censor it, you would be put on some kind of watch list if you wrote anything that was slightly questionable in it. So you would give it to somebody who knew somebody who was going to the place where you were going. And it's funny, you get completely, I was anyway, completely tied up in knots with some of this stuff. So I eventually just cut the scene from the film because in order to be authentic, it was just too much. So yeah, again, just scribbles. This is where it all happens. I think scribbles are, because you're trying to ingest all of this information, you're trying to communicate it to yourself first and foremost, and then that makes you able to communicate it to an entire team. And once you get past your locked animatic with a feature film, it's just about communicating the same information to different teams of people, helping them discover how their skill sets can help, inform that film. But it's the same information. The information I give the composer is the same as I give the storyboarder. Really, they just translate it in a different way for their own skill sets. It's all about, why does this scene exist? What is this character? What are they doing? So we built this whole film, and again, it was open-ended for a long time. So we built the film around themes, a repetition, basically, the idea of cycles of violence and peace. And we tried to build in a lot into every single frame. And again, the amount of research that went into trying to understand the history of Afghanistan, and hearing all the different perspectives, depending on people's religious perspectives or their political perspectives, was really interesting. But I had, an incredible team. This is an image from Julien Renard, who I spelled his name wrong, a filmmaker. So again, most of the people I work with are filmmakers in their own right, right? They could do my job hands down easier and better than I could, But when you have conversations with people who share a sensibility with you, it means that you have a fantastic shorthand. You don't spend a lot of time fighting against different types of sensibilities, I guess. And we discovered that there were themes in our films that we wanted to, universal themes that we knew that we could reach out to our audience with. We all have to eat, we all argue, toddlers are the same no matter what language they speak, it's Babel. Shared moments. I love in films, I love in reality when you're sharing something really intense or personal with somebody and you're not looking at them, I love that. That's a real fakeness about film. I think when people are intense about what they're saying to each other and they're looking straight into each other's eyes, that never really happens. Most of the time when somebody says something really raw or truthful, they're not looking at you because they can't. Safe places. And for me, this was a big one. Certainly something that I really related to as a mother. When my head was going crazy with this film, I would often go into my kids' bedroom and just put my head on their pillow, because it became a quiet place and a place where I remembered, what I'm for, where my center is, I guess. I have a huge amount of control over editing. And I do that so that I can give a lot of control then to my heads of departments subsequently and make sure that they're completely empowered, You have to be really aware as a director that you don't take power from your heads of department, that you facilitate them and you make sure that you empower them instead, because they will make your film better, a million times better than if you try to do it yourself. So for me, keeping a lot of control here and really hands-on means that I can do that, means that I can actually give away a lot more, certainly as the process evolves. Again, this is very much a film of the internet. We were able to, we were having scenes animated in Luxembourg with animators that I wouldn't share a first language with, or we mightn't even speak the same language at all. But I could pull down their scene, I could draw over it and send it back to them in 10 minutes. They'd have it in real time. And for me, that was absolutely amazing. The evolution of production pipeline software is so freeing as a storyteller. Means that you can tell these stories using, the best, companies or the most like-minded companies around the world. So I'm just going to briefly talk about this. I'm going to leave a little bit of time for questions. Are you in question mood, or are you in listening mood, or? Yeah, 10 minutes, grand. Okay, I can ask myself questions. Well, what's this slide about, Nora? Well, Kieran Duffy is one of our art directors, and Reza Riahi. They had both completely different styles. Again, it wasn't exactly, in some ways it's not a great idea to have two art directors on one film, but this worked really well because the clash that happened in terms of style and all the conversations and arguments and all that kind of stuff meant that this film was pushed in a way that it would never have been if we were all just nodding politely at each other, It was a really interesting push and pull. And very romantic, looking off into the distance. What was great though about everybody that I worked with on this film is that the amount of research that everybody was prepared to do. We were really, again, so aware of what we were taking on, and we wanted to make sure that we were being as truthful as we possibly could. I've watched this film with people who were incarcerated in the prison that we show in the film, and because we couldn't get any pictures, and if I'd known afterwards, of course. Anyway, but it's just it's animation again. The way that people project onto animation is incredible. So people who are very familiar with this whole lifestyle or would have lived in Afghanistan at the time project a lot into this film, and they think that there's a lot more there than there actually is, or they think there's a lot more intent there than there actually is. Again, you have to be aware that your audience is bringing their own stuff to the film that you made, and it's no longer no longer your film. I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly, again, just to show you, the breadth of areas that we went to in terms of figuring out the style and all of this kind of stuff. We spent a long time trying to understand how we could create a really immersive place for Piranha to exist. One of the weirdest compliments I get with this film is that after 5 minutes you forget that it's animated, as though that's a kind of a compliment or something like that. But in a way, it means that people are just pulled into it, so they're not really seeing the medium anymore. They're just seeing the characters, which is really amazing. So someday I'm going to give a talk which is perfectly balanced, doesn't all kind of rush towards the end. I always end up flicking through. I should actually start backwards sometime. But anyway, so we eventually ended up with this kind of look. But again, we weren't afraid to just explore, And you can only do that if you're confident with the people around you, and that if you're in a very constructive relationship with all of your team, and very encouraging. Again, as a director, it's just amazing to me if you're encouraging towards your team. They just access creativity that is just astounding, and you feel such a sense of pride, I guess, when you see people take leaps, in the work that they're doing. So yeah, it was a film about communication. We did all kinds of things, lots and lots and lots of work. And we were balancing, the two kinds of worlds in the film and that. But I just want, for me, I guess what's really interesting, so this is Jenny Sossel who did a lot of these paper cutouts, which helped us a lot with figuring out Suleiman's journey in the film, figuring out the visual look. We worked with an incredible team in Toronto as well, who took all of this kind of information and put it into place in Nuke. We worked with Jeremy Purcell, another person who I've been to college with and have a long working relationship with, who did an absolutely incredible job on the story world. But I wanted to talk just a tiny little bit about life, right? So when I was making The Breadwinner, and again, it reminds me of the whole what's the word? It's a nice time to have brain block, isn't it? So sorry, it's just because I'm flicking through slides as fast as I can to get to the next bit. But so yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about life, right? So when I was making the Breadwinner, it was an incredible experience. Again, a huge learning curve. And we screened the film everywhere. There was a huge mural made of it in Kabul and that, and it was incredibly successful and all that kind of stuff. But it was a huge contrast for me because at the time I got really sick. I got cancer diagnosis in the middle of making this film. And I didn't know what I was going to do because suddenly something didn't fit my schedule, right? So I knew that the film was going to finish in 2017, but I certainly had this thing that I didn't know what the schedule was for what's cancer's schedule, right? But the weird thing is, with that was I managed to kind of work through it, but again, because I had empowered my team, because they all kind of understood what they were doing, right? Because I had kept control of the film back in the Avid kind of part of the whole situation. I kind of understood how we could go forward with it. So we did. So in ways that didn't, again, my co-producers, were pretty fucking amazing because they let me continue directing, right? Yeah, cancer is kind of funny, but kind of not as well. So I kept going. And again, like day to day, week to week, not really knowing. Sometimes I couldn't come into work. Sometimes I was Skyping in. Sometimes I was too sick. And sometimes, like Stuart Shankly, my assistant director, would take over. But again, I was able to, because I had put in a lot of effort making sure that everybody was completely empowered. It meant that we could all continue to work together even when crazy shit happened, And it could only do that because of people. People in Ireland, in Luxembourg, in Canada, tons of them, just working away. And, they wouldn't particularly say something if I came in suddenly with like one eyebrow. So they tell you that you're going to lose your hair. They don't tell you you're going to lose their eyebrows and your eyelashes. So I used to paint on, depending on what expression I felt like having in the morning, I would paint on eyebrows. But then like the frustration of a meeting, whatever, halfway through the day, I would rub one off. Nobody ever would bat an eyelid. I would always go into the bathroom and discover that I had an entire smudge, kind of, and only one eyebrow left. And I would just paint it back on. Nobody said anything. So, you know, people, like this is Kawa Ada, who's an incredible actor who played the part of Razak, but who's massive support through the whole thing. Anita Duran, our screenwriter again. Yeah, just, you know, again, you know, fuck it, because at the end of the day, it's cartoons, right? I mean, so cartoons are, so I don't know. Anyway, look, that's, I just wanted, because, you know, sometimes, you know, people will give a presentation, it's like, here is one aspect of myself. But, you know, we are all many aspects. You know, there's a lot of depth to everyone. Lots of shit happens in everyone's life all the time, and you can use that to inform your work. Honestly, the relationships I have from that film, you know, are incredible because there's a sense of reality about them. You can also ask for about 20 or 30% more retakes if you have cancer, I find as well, and people don't mind. So, buddies, back to buddies. You know, thick and thin. There you go. That's me, still looking for lines, still drawing. This is like the first pages of sketchbooks, and this is the last pages of sketchbooks. There you go. And I'm working on a film now with for Netflix with the incredible Meg LaFauve. You might have seen Captain Marvel. She was one of the writers on that. We have incredible producers, co-producers, lots of women on this film, which is amazing too. And that's it. Thank you.